United States law enforcement and crime. Law enforcement in the United States is primarily the responsibility of local police departments and sheriff's offices, with state police providing broader services. The New York City Police Department, NYPD, is the largest in the country. Federal agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the U.S. Marshals Service have specialized duties, including protecting civil rights, national security and enforcing U.S. federal courts' rulings and federal laws. At the federal level and in almost every state, a legal system operates on a common law. State courts conduct most criminal trials. Federal courts handle certain designated crimes as well as certain appeals from the state criminal courts. Plea bargaining is very common. The vast majority of criminal cases in the country are settled by plea bargain rather than jury trial. In 2015, there were 15,696 murders, which was 1,532 more than in 2014, a 10.8% increase, the largest since 1971. The murder rate in 2015 was 4.9 per 100,000 people. In 2016, the murder rate increased by 8.6%. With 17,413 murders that year. The national clearance rate for homicides in 2015 was 64.1%, compared to 90% in 1965. In 2012 there were 4.7 murders per 100,000 persons in the United States, a 54% decline from the modern peak of 10.2 in 1980. In 2001-2, the United States had above-average levels of violent crime and particularly high levels of gun violence compared to other developed nations. A cross-sectional analysis of the World Health Organization mortality database from 2010 showed that United States homicide rates were 7.0 times higher than in other high-income countries, driven by a gun homicide rate that was 25.2 times higher. Gun ownership rights continue to be the subject of contentious political debate. In 2016, the U.S. murder rate of 5.4 per 100,000 was similar to the estimated global average of 5.15 per 100,000. In 2017, there were 17,264 murders and the murder rate was 5.3 per 100,000. Regarding weapons, 73% of murders were committed by firearm, 10% by knife and 17% by other means. The violent crime rose sharply in the 1960s until the early 1990s and declined in the late 1990s and 2000s. In 2014, the murder rate fell to the lowest level, 4.5, since 1957. 4.0. The violent crime rate increased by 5.9% between 2014 and 2017 and the murder rate by 20.5%. Of those arrested for serious violent crimes in 2017, 58.5% were white, 37.5% were black, 2.1% were American Indian or Alaska Native and 1.5% Asian. Ethnically, 23.5% were Hispanic and 76.5% were non-Hispanic. Gun violence peaked in 1993 with 17,125 gun murders before declining to 9,527 in 1999 and steadily rising since to 12,772. Non-gun murders reached a peak in 1980 of 8,340 and declined in most years until the early 2010s with 4,668 in 2017. The rate of robberies declined 62% between 1990 and 2017. From 1980 through 2008, males represented 77% of homicide victims and 90% of offenders. Blacks committed 52.5% of all homicides during that span, at a rate almost 8 times that of whites. Whites includes most Hispanics, and were victimized at a rate 6 times that of whites. Most homicides were intraracial, with 93% of black victims killed by blacks and 84% of white victims killed by whites. In 2012, Louisiana had the highest rate of murder and non-negligent manslaughter in the U.S., and New Hampshire the lowest. The FBI's Uniform Crime Reports estimates that there were 3,246 violent and property crimes per 100,000 residents in 2012, for a total of over 9 million total crimes. Capital punishment is sanctioned in the United States for certain federal and military crimes, and also at the state level in 30 states. No executions took place from 1967 to 1977, owing in part to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling striking down arbitrary imposition of the death penalty. In 1976, that court ruled that, under appropriate circumstances, capital punishment may constitutionally be imposed. Since the decision, there have been more than 1,300 executions, a majority of these taking place in 3 states, Texas, Virginia, and Oklahoma. Meanwhile, several states have either abolished or struck down death penalty laws. In 2015, The country had the fifth highest number of executions in the world, following China, Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. The United States has the highest documented incarceration rate and largest prison population in the world. At the start of 2008, more than 2.3 million people were incarcerated, more than 1 in every 100 adults. In December 2012, the combined U.S. adult correctional system supervised about 6,937,600 offenders. About 1 in every 35 adult residents in the United States was under some form of correctional supervision in December 2012, the lowest rate observed since 1997. The prison population has quadrupled since 1980. And state and local spending on prisons and jails has grown 3 times as much as that spent on public education during the same period. However, the imprisonment rate for all prisoners sentenced to more than a year in state or federal facilities is 478 per 100,000 in 2013, and the rate for pretrial/remand prisoners is 153 per 100,000 residents in 2012. The country's high rate of incarceration is largely due to changes in sentencing guidelines and drug policies. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the majority of inmates held in federal prisons are convicted of drug offenses. The privatization of prisons and prison services, which began in the 1980s, has been a subject of debate. In 2018, Oklahoma had the highest incarceration rate, 1,079 per 100,000 people, and Massachusetts the lowest, 324 per 100,000 people. Among the U.S. territories, the highest incarceration rate was in the U.S. Virgin Islands, 542 per 100,000 people, and the lowest was in Puerto Rico, 313 per 100,000 people.